The smell hit Michael Simmons like a sledgehammer to the chest, sweet, cloying, and unmistakably deadly. Natural gas. His weathered hands froze on the industrial mop handle as the acrid scent crawled through the marble corridors of Pinnacle Tower's executive floor. 23 floors above Chicago's bustling streets, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of Lake Michigan, Michael had learned to trust his instincts. Tonight, those instincts screamed danger. If you're enjoying this incredible story of how one split-second decision changed everything, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more amazing, real-life stories that will inspire you. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. Most of the building's occupants had long since retreated to their suburban sanctuaries, leaving behind only the soft hum of computers in standby mode and the occasional whisper of the ventilation system. Michael preferred these late hours, fewer interruptions, fewer condescending glances, fewer reminders that at 42 he was still pushing a mop instead of pursuing the engineering dreams that had once burned bright in his chest. His worn work boots squeaked against the polished marble as he abandoned his cleaning cart and followed the intensifying odor toward the corner office. The nameplate on the heavy oak door read Victoria Sterling, CEO. Michael had seen her exactly 3 times in his 2 years working this building, always striding past in designer heels, phone pressed to her ear, treating the world around her like scenery in her personal movie. But tonight, something was wrong. The gas smell grew stronger with each step. Michael's pulse quickened as he remembered his training from his brief stint as a construction worker 15 years ago, before Emma was born, before everything changed. Natural gas was heavier than air. It settled in low places, accumulated in corners, waited for the smallest spark to transform a quiet evening into a catastrophe. He pressed his ear to the office door. Silence. Complete, unsettling silence. "Ma'am?" His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. "Ma'am, are you in there?" Nothing. Michael's calloused hands wrapped around the door handle and he cursed under his breath when it turned easily. Unlocked. The smell that rushed out nearly knocked him backward, thick, overwhelming, dangerous. His eyes watered as he stepped into the darkened office, squinting through the shadows cast by the city lights filtering through massive windows. There, slumped over an antique desk that probably cost more than Michael's annual salary, was Victoria Sterling. Her platinum blonde hair cascaded across scattered papers, and her chest rose and fell in shallow, labored breaths. A crystal whiskey glass lay shattered on the Persian rug beside her chair, its contents seeping into the intricate patterns that told stories of craftsmanship Michael could only imagine. "Jesus Christ!" Michael whispered, his voice barely audible over the soft hiss coming from somewhere near the wall. He spotted it immediately, a gas line behind an ornate bookshelf where construction work had apparently been done recently. Someone had been careless, deadly careless. Michael's mind raced through calculations he hadn't used since trade school, before Emma was born, before everything changed. Natural gas was heavier than air. It settled in low places, accumulated in corners, waited for the smallest spark to transform a quiet evening into a catastrophe. He pressed his ear to the office door. Silence. "Ma'am, are you in there?" Nothing.
Michael scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. His back, already aching from hours of mopping and vacuuming, protested the additional weight, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He carried her toward the door, careful not to move too quickly, mindful of every step that could generate a spark. The hallway felt like salvation. Clean air, no hissing sounds, no imminent threat of explosion. Michael gently lowered Victoria onto the marble floor, positioning her in the recovery position he'd learned during a long-ago first aid course. Her breathing began to improve almost immediately, color slowly returning to her pale cheeks. "Stay with me," Michael murmured, pulling out his cell phone with one hand while keeping the other on her wrist to monitor her pulse. 911? Yes, I need to report a gas leak and possible gas poisoning. Pinnacle Tower, 23rd floor, executive suite. As he spoke to the dispatcher, Michael's eyes kept darting back toward the office door. The gas would keep building, keep spreading until someone shut off the line or the building's ventilation system cleared it out. But there were other people in the building. Security guards making their rounds, other cleaning staff working different floors, maybe even a few workaholics pulling all-nighters. "Sir, are you still there?" The dispatcher's voice sounded distant through his phone. "Yeah, I'm here. Listen, you need to evacuate the whole building. This could spread to other floors, and if someone flips the wrong switch or lights a cigarette—" Michael didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Victoria's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. She tried to sit up, but Michael gently pressed her shoulder back down. "Don't move yet. You've been breathing natural gas. The paramedics are on their way." "Who?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and fragile. "Who are you?" Michael almost laughed at the question. 2 years of cleaning around her, of being invisible in her world, and now she was asking who he was. "Michael Simmons. I work here. Cleaning crew." Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a flicker of recognition, or maybe just confusion from the gas exposure. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair messed, her composure completely shattered. For the first time since Michael had started working in this building, she looked like someone he might actually be able to talk to. The elevator chimed in the distance, followed by the sound of heavy boots and urgent voices. The paramedics had arrived faster than Michael had expected. As he heard them approaching, calling out their location, Michael realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear, that had passed. From something else. Something that felt suspiciously like purpose. "The office," Victoria whispered, trying again to sit up. "My files, my computer." "Everything's still there. Once they fix the gas line and clear the air, it'll all be fine. Right now, we just need to worry about you." The paramedics rounded the corner. 2 young men with efficient movements and kind eyes. Michael stepped back to give them room, watching as they took over Victoria's care with practiced professionalism. Blood oxygen levels, pupil response, questions about symptoms and medical history. The routine of emergency response that transformed chaos into manageable problems. "You did good," one of the paramedics said to Michael as they prepared to transport Victoria to the hospital. "Gas poisoning can be fatal if someone doesn't get help fast enough. You probably saved her life." Michael nodded, not trusting his voice to respond. He watched as they loaded Victoria onto a stretcher, her eyes closed again, but her breathing strong and steady. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Michael found himself alone in the marble hallway, the faint smell of natural gas still lingering in the air like a reminder of how quickly everything could have gone wrong. The fire department arrived next, followed by building security and a representative from the gas company. Michael answered their questions, explained what he'd found and what he'd done, provided his contact information for follow-up reports, about the way Victoria had looked at him when she asked who he was. Not through him, not past him, but at him, like he was a person worth seeing. By the time Michael finally made it home to his small apartment in Cicero, the sun was already beginning to rise over the Chicago skyline. His daughter Emma was still asleep in her narrow bed, her algebra textbook open beside her pillow where she'd fallen asleep studying. 14 years old, brilliant, and determined to get into a good college despite their financial circumstances, she looked so much like her mother that sometimes Michael had to look away. He sat on the edge of his own bed, still wearing his uniform, and stared out the window at the awakening city. 24 hours ago, his biggest concern had been whether Emma's winter coat would last another season. Now, he'd saved someone's life. Someone important, someone wealthy, someone who lived in a world so different from his that they might as well have been from different planets. Michael pulled off his work boots and noticed a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. A business card, expensive-looking, with Victoria Sterling's name embossed in elegant script. He didn't remember picking it up, but it must have fallen from her desk when he was carrying her to safety. Her direct phone number was written on the back in careful handwriting, along with the words, "personal line." He set the card on his nightstand and lay back on his pillow, exhaustion finally overtaking him. But sleep didn't come easily. Instead, Michael found himself wondering about the woman he'd saved, about the life she lived in that corner office, about whether she would remember him when she recovered. Most importantly, he wondered if saving Victoria Sterling's life would somehow change his own. The morning news was already covering the story when Emma woke him up 3 hours later. "Dad, look at this," she said, holding up her phone with a news article displayed on the screen. "There was a gas leak at Pinnacle Tower last night. Says here a janitor saved some CEO lady's life. That's your building, isn't it?" Michael sat up slowly, his back aching from the previous night's activities and the brief, uncomfortable sleep. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that's my building." Emma's eyes widened as she studied his face. "Dad, that was you, wasn't it? You're the janitor they're talking about." Michael nodded, unsure how to feel about seeing his actions reduced to a few paragraphs in a news story. The article mentioned Victoria Sterling by name, but only referred to him as a building employee who wishes to remain anonymous. Even in the story of his own heroic act, he was invisible. "You saved someone's life, Dad. A real person's actual life." "Yeah, kiddo, I guess I did." But as Michael looked at his daughter's proud smile, at the cramped apartment they called home, at the pile of bills on the kitchen counter that never seemed to get any smaller, he wondered what saving Victoria Sterling's life would actually mean for them. Heroes in movies got rewarded, got recognition, got their lives transformed by single acts of courage. Real life, Michael had learned, was usually much more complicated than that. 3 days passed before Michael returned to work. The building management had given him paid leave while they investigated the gas leak, a courtesy he suspected came more from liability concerns than genuine care for his well-being. He spent those days in a strange limbo, wandering his neighborhood streets, sitting in the park where Emma used to play as a little girl, trying to process what had happened and what it might mean. Emma had been transformed by the news. She walked taller, spoke with more confidence about her college plans, and introduced him to her friends as "my dad, the hero." Michael found her pride both touching and concerning. He knew how quickly the world could disappoint a 14-year-old who believed too strongly in fairy tale endings.
Michael stirred his coffee, cheap, instant, not the gourmet stuff he cleaned up around every night at Pinnacle Tower. "She was pretty out of it, Em. Probably doesn't even remember what happened clearly." "Dad." Emma fixed him with the same direct stare her mother used to deploy when she thought he was being deliberately obtuse. "You literally saved her life. She's going to remember that." But Michael wasn't so sure. In his experience, the wealthy had short memories when it came to the help. How many times had he cleaned an executive's office while they conducted important phone calls, completely ignoring his presence? How many times had someone walked past him in the hallway without a glance, as if he were furniture that happened to move? When Michael finally returned to Pinnacle Tower on Friday night, the building felt different. Word had gotten around, and suddenly everyone knew who he was. Jerry, the security guard who'd never bothered to learn his name in 2 years, greeted him with enthusiasm. "Michael, man, you're famous! Channel 7 called asking if they could interview you." "What did you tell them?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "That you're a private guy. Figured you'd want to handle that yourself." Jerry's gap-toothed grin suggested he thought he'd done Michael a huge favor. "But hey, bet this whole thing changes everything for you, right? Rich lady's probably going to set you up for life." Michael forced a smile and headed for the elevator. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of, the assumption that saving Victoria Sterling's life should somehow solve all his problems. Real life didn't work that way. Rich people didn't hand out fortunes to working-class heroes just because it made for a good story. The 23rd floor had been thoroughly cleaned and inspected. The gas line had been repaired, the office aired out, and new safety protocols implemented throughout the building. When Michael pushed his cart past Victoria Sterling's office, he saw that the door was closed and the lights were off. She probably hadn't returned to work yet. Maybe she never would. Traumatic experiences had a way of changing people's perspectives on familiar places. Michael's routine felt mechanical that night. Vacuum, mop, empty trash bins, wipe down surfaces. The same tasks he'd performed thousands of times before, but somehow they felt different now. Every office held the potential for emergency. Every unusual smell made him pause. Every closed door made him wonder who might need help on the other side. Around midnight, as he was cleaning the break room on the 20th floor, Michael's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer it. Telemarketers had no sense of appropriate calling times, but something made him swipe to accept the call. "Is this Michael Simmons?" The voice was cultured, precise, and somehow familiar despite its professional tone. "Yes, this is Michael. This is Victoria Sterling. I wanted to call and thank you personally for what you did Monday night." Michael nearly dropped his phone. He looked around the empty break room as if someone might appear to help him navigate this conversation. "Oh, hi. Miss Sterling, how are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was warmer, less formal. "The doctors told me that if I'd been in that office much longer, the outcome could have been very different. You saved my life, Michael." Hearing his name from her lips felt strange and significant. "I'm glad you're okay. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Most people would have called building security and waited for someone else to handle it. You acted immediately, without hesitation, without thinking about your own safety. That's not something just anyone would do." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. I'd never thought of myself as particularly brave or heroic. I'd just seen a problem and tried to fix it, the same way I approached most things in life. "I was wondering if you might be free for coffee sometime. I'd like to thank you properly, and I have to admit I'm curious about the man who saved my life. I realized Monday night that in all the time I've worked in that building, I've never really paid attention to the people who keep it running."
Coffee with Victoria Sterling. Michael tried to imagine it, sitting across from her in some upscale cafe, making small talk with someone who lived in a completely different world. "That's very kind of you, Miss Sterling, but you don't need to." "I want to," she interrupted. "Please, let me buy you coffee. Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" Michael thought about Emma's reaction when she found out he turned down this opportunity. Thought about Jerry's assumptions and the news reports and all the ways this simple conversation was already changing how people saw him. "Okay," he heard himself say. "Coffee sounds nice." They arranged to meet at a small cafe near the building. Nothing too fancy, Victoria assured him. After she hung up, Michael stood in the empty break room, staring at his phone and wondering what he'd just agreed to. The next morning, Michael spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear. His wardrobe consisted mainly of work uniforms, casual clothes for weekends, and one decent outfit for Emma's school events. Nothing seemed appropriate for coffee with a CEO. Finally, Emma took pity on him and helped him put together dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and the sport coat he'd bought for her 8th grade graduation. "You look good, Dad," she said, straightening his collar. "Just be yourself." Easy for her to say. Michael wasn't even sure who himself was in this context. He had spent so many years being invisible, being the help, being someone that other people looked through rather than at. The idea of sitting across from Victoria Sterling as an equal, having an actual conversation, felt like stepping into someone else's life. The cafe Victoria had chosen was small and intimate, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Not the upscale establishment Michael had expected, but somehow that made it more nerve-wracking rather than less. At least in a fancy restaurant, he could have blamed any awkwardness on being out of his element. This place looked like somewhere he might actually belong. Victoria was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a large coffee and what looked like a stack of paperwork. She had traded her designer suits for jeans and a simple sweater, and without the armor of executive fashion, she looked younger, more approachable.
When she saw him, she smiled and waved him over. "Michael, thank you for coming." She stood to greet him, and for a moment, they both seemed uncertain about the appropriate level of formality. The handshake, a hug. In the end, Victoria settled for a warm smile and a gesture toward the empty side of the booth. "Thank you for inviting me," Michael replied, sliding into his seat and trying not to stare at the woman across from him. Up close, without the haze of emergency and gas exposure, Victoria Sterling was undeniably beautiful. But more than that, she had an intensity that made it hard to look away, as if she approached everything in life with complete focus and determination. "What would you like?" Victoria asked, already signaling the server. "Coffee? Tea? They have excellent pastries here." Michael ordered black coffee and found himself relaxing slightly as they settled into the comfortable rhythms of small talk. Victoria asked about his neighborhood, his daughter, his background. She listened with genuine attention, asking follow-up questions that suggested she was actually interested in his answers, rather than just being polite. "Emma sounds wonderful," Victoria said, after Michael had told her about his daughter's academic achievements and college ambitions. "You must be incredibly proud." "She's the best thing in my life," Michael said simply. "Everything I do is for her." "What happened to her mother, if you don't mind me asking?" The question Michael had been dreading, but somehow expecting. "Cancer," he said quietly. "Emma was 8. Sarah fought for 2 years, but—" He shrugged, the gesture encompassing everything he couldn't or wouldn't say about those terrible months of watching his wife fade away. "I'm so sorry." Victoria's voice was soft, filled with the kind of sympathy that suggested she'd experienced her own share of loss. That must have been incredibly difficult.
It was. Michael found himself saying more than he'd intended. Sarah was the organized one, the planner, the one who had everything figured out. When she died, I had no idea how to be a single parent, how to manage everything alone. I made a lot of mistakes. But you figured it out? Emma figured it out, Michael corrected. She's more mature than most adults I know. Had to grow up fast after Sarah died. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. What did you do before the cleaning job? You seem, I don't know, like someone who's done other things. Michael almost smiled at her diplomatic phrasing. I was studying engineering when I met Sarah. Had 2 years left on my degree when Emma was born. We needed money immediately, so I took a construction job, told myself I'd finish school once we got on our feet financially. He paused, stirring his coffee absently. Emma's 14 now. Still haven't finished that degree. Why not? Victoria's question wasn't judgmental, just curious. Time, money, energy. When you're working nights and taking care of a kid during the day, there's not much left over for anything else. Besides, I'm 42, probably too old to be starting over. That's ridiculous. Victoria's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being listened to. 42 is nothing. People change careers at 60, 70. Age is just an excuse. Michael looked at her, this woman who'd probably never had to choose between paying rent and pursuing her dreams, and felt a familiar surge of frustration. It's not just about age. It's about reality. I can't afford to quit my job and go back to school. Emma needs stability, needs to know there's food on the table and a roof over her head. Dreams are luxury items. Instead of being offended by his sharp tone, Victoria leaned forward with interest. What if I told you there might be other options, ways to pursue your education without giving up financial security? I'd say you don't understand how the world works for people like me. The words came out harsher than Michael intended. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those intense eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. You're right, I don't understand your world. I've been incredibly privileged my entire life. Private schools, Ivy League education, family connections that opened doors before I even knew they were closed for other people. But I do understand something about hard work and determination, and I recognize it when I see it. Michael felt some of his anger deflate. There was something disarming about her honesty, her willingness to acknowledge her privilege without becoming defensive about it. What I don't understand, Victoria continued,
is why someone who saved my life won't let me try to return the favor. Because it wasn't a favor. It was just the right thing to do. You don't owe me anything for doing what any decent person would do. But that's exactly why you deserve help, because you don't expect it, because you acted without thinking about what you might get in return, because you're sitting here now telling me that saving my life was just basic human decency. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Michael found himself studying Victoria's hands as she held her coffee cup, soft, manicured, bearing a simple but expensive-looking watch. The hands of someone who'd never had to scrub floors or worry about calluses. But her eyes, when he met them again, held something that looked like genuine respect. "What are you suggesting?" Michael asked finally. "I'm not sure yet," Victoria admitted. "But I have resources, connections, opportunities. Maybe there's a way I can help you finish your education, help Emma with college costs, help you build a different kind of future. Not as charity," she added quickly, seeing the expression on his face. "As an investment, in someone who's proven he has character and integrity." "I don't want your money." "Then what do you want?"
The question caught him off guard. What did he want? For so many years, his wants had been simple, basic. Keep Emma safe, keep the bills paid, survive each day until the next one. The idea of wanting something more, something bigger, felt dangerous and unfamiliar. "I want Emma to have opportunities I never had," he said finally. "I want her to be able to pursue her dreams without worrying about money. I want to feel like I'm more than just someone who empties trash cans and pushes a mop around." "You are more than that," Victoria said firmly. "You're a father who's raised an incredible daughter on your own. You're a man who risked his life to save a stranger. You're someone with enough intelligence and education to recognize gas poisoning and act on it decisively. The job you do doesn't define who you are." Michael wanted to argue with her, to point out all the ways society had already defined him based on his occupation and economic status. But something in her voice, something sincere and determined, made him hold back. "Let me think about what I might be able to offer," Victoria said. "And I want you to think about what you'd actually want if money and practicality weren't factors. Can you do that?" Michael nodded, though he wasn't sure he could separate his wants from the practical realities that had shaped his life for so long. As they prepared to leave, Victoria reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "Thank you again, Michael, for saving my life, yes, but also for this conversation. You've given me a lot to think about." Walking home through his neighborhood streets, Michael felt as if he were seeing everything with new eyes. The shabby apartment buildings, the corner store with its barred windows, the park where teenagers gathered in groups that made other people cross the street. This was his world, the world he'd made for Emma, the world he'd accepted as permanent. But Victoria Sterling's questions echoed in his mind. What did he want? What would he do if money and practicality weren't factors? For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life, not just for Emma, but for himself. The possibility felt fragile and dangerous, like something that could be easily broken if he held it too tightly. But it was there, growing stronger with each step toward home, where his daughter waited with homework questions and stories about her day, trusting him to provide answers and stability, even when he wasn't sure he had either to give. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the coffee meeting. Michael was helping Emma with her geometry homework, one of the few subjects where he still felt competent to assist her, when Victoria Sterling's number appeared on his phone screen. "Michael, I hope I'm not calling too early." Her voice carried an excitement that immediately put him on alert. "I have a proposition for you, something I've been working on since our conversation." Emma looked up from her textbook, eyebrows raised with curiosity. Michael held up a finger, indicating he needed to focus on the call. "I'm listening," he said carefully. "There's a program at Northwestern University, continuing education for working adults. They have partnerships with several major corporations to provide educational opportunities for employees who show potential. I've been in discussions with the program director, and I'd like to sponsor your enrollment." Michael felt his stomach drop. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. Victoria Sterling deciding to play fairy godmother to the grateful janitor. "Miss Sterling, Victoria, please. And before you say no, hear me out completely. This isn't charity. Sterling Industries needs qualified facilities managers, people who understand both the technical and operational aspects of building management. You'd continue working part-time while taking classes with the understanding that upon graduation, you'd transition into a management position with our company." "You want to hire me?" Michael's voice cracked slightly on the question.
"I want to invest in you," Victoria corrected. "There's a difference. You've already proven you're observant, quick-thinking, and responsible. You understand the building systems because you work with them every day. With formal training in engineering and management, you'd be exactly the kind of employee we need." Emma was no longer pretending to focus on her homework. She watched her father's face intently, clearly trying to decode the conversation from his side of the dialogue. "I don't understand," Michael said. "Why me? You must know dozens of qualified people who could fill a position like that." "I know dozens of people with qualifications on paper. I know very few people who would risk their lives to save a stranger without expecting anything in return. Character isn't something you can teach, Michael. Everything else can be learned." Michael walked into the kitchen, seeking privacy for a conversation that was rapidly becoming more important than anything he'd discussed in years. What exactly would this involve? Classes 2 evenings per week and Saturday mornings. All tuition, books, and fees covered. You'd maintain your current salary while working reduced hours to accommodate your schedule. The program is designed for working adults. They understand you have responsibilities outside of school. It sounded too good to be true, which in Michael's experience usually meant it was. "What's the catch?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "The catch is that it's hard work. The catch is that you'd be committing to 3 years of intensive study while maintaining your job and raising your daughter. The catch is that you'd have to believe you deserve this opportunity and be willing to work for it. And if I fail, if I can't handle the workload or the academic requirements, then you continue in your current position with the same salary and benefits. No penalty, no consequences. But I don't think you'll fail, Michael. I think you'll surprise yourself with what you're capable of achieving." After Victoria hung up, Michael stood in his small kitchen, staring at the phone in his hand. Through the doorway, he could see Emma pretending to study while obviously waiting for him to return and explain what had just happened. "Dad?" Emma's voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the hope underneath it. "Was that about a job?" Michael sat down across from her, pushing her textbook aside. "It was about school, actually. Victoria Sterling wants to sponsor me to go back to college, finish my engineering degree." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Dad, that's incredible. You have to say yes." "It's not that simple, Em. It would mean 3 years of night classes and weekend study. It would mean less time together, more stress, no guarantee it would work out." "But it could work out," Emma insisted. "It could change everything for us." That was what Michael was afraid of. Change meant uncertainty, meant giving up the familiar struggles for unknown challenges. He'd built his life around predictability and stability. Maybe it wasn't much, but it was secure. Over the next few days, Michael found himself discussing the opportunity with people he'd never expected to confide in. Jerry, the security guard, was enthusiastic. "Man, you'd be crazy not to take it. Rich lady wants to pay for your education? That's like winning the lottery." Maria Gonzalez, who cleaned the floors below Michael's usual territory, was more cautious. "Be careful, mijo. Rich people don't give away something for nothing. They always want more than they say they want." Even Father Thompson at St. Catherine's, where Michael sometimes took Emma for Sunday Mass, had an opinion. "Fear is the enemy of faith, Michael. Sometimes God opens doors in ways we don't expect. But it was Emma who forced him to confront the real issue. On Friday evening, as they shared Chinese takeout in front of the television, she muted the volume and turned to face him directly. "Dad, you were scared."
"I'm being practical," Michael corrected. "You're scared," Emma repeated firmly. "You're scared that if you try something bigger and fail, it'll be worse than never trying at all." Michael stared at his daughter. When had she become so perceptive, so willing to call him on his fears? "Maybe I am scared. Is that so wrong?" "It's not wrong, but it's not a good enough reason to say no." Emma's voice carried a maturity that reminded Michael painfully of her mother. "You always tell me to work hard in school, to not let anyone limit my dreams. How can you tell me that if you won't even try for your own dreams?" The next Monday morning, Michael called Victoria Sterling's office and accepted her offer. The first few weeks of classes were a brutal adjustment. Michael hadn't been in a classroom setting in over 20 years, hadn't taken notes or written papers or studied for exams since Emma was a toddler. The other students in his program were younger, more recently educated, were comfortable with technology and academic terminology. Professor David Kim, who taught the structural engineering course, seemed to take particular pleasure in calling on Michael during lectures, asking complex questions about load-bearing calculations and material stress analysis. Michael suspected it was a test. The professor wanted to see if the older student could keep up with the academic pace. "Mr. Simmons," Professor Kim said during the third week of classes, "can you explain why we use steel reinforcement in concrete construction?" Michael felt 25 pairs of eyes turned toward him. His classmates were mostly in their 20s and 30s, many of them already working in engineering or construction firms, several with advanced degrees in related fields. He was the only janitor in the room. "Steel has high tensile strength," Michael began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through him. "Concrete is excellent under compression, but weak when pulled apart. The steel reinforcement handles the tensile forces, creating a composite material that's strong in both compression and tension." Professor Kim nodded approvingly. "And why is the bond between steel and concrete so effective?" "Similar thermal expansion coefficients," Michael replied, drawing on knowledge he'd absorbed from years of working around building systems. "They expand and contract at nearly the same rate, so temperature changes don't create stress between the materials." "Very good, Mr. Simmons. It's clear you understand the practical applications of these principles." After class, a younger student named Brad approached Michael with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "You really know this stuff. What's your background? Construction management?" "Facilities maintenance," Michael replied simply. Brad's expression shifted subtly. "Oh, like custodial work?" "Like keeping buildings running safely and efficiently," Michael said, his tone remaining neutral despite the sting of judgment he heard in Brad's voice. The interaction stayed with Michael throughout the week. He found himself second-guessing his contributions in class, wondering if his practical knowledge was somehow less valuable than his classmates' theoretical education. When Professor Kim assigned a group project analyzing the structural integrity of an existing Chicago building, Michael was relieved to be paired with Sarah Chen, a quiet woman who worked as a project coordinator for a civil engineering firm. "I know this is probably presumptuous, but could we possibly examine your building, Pinnacle Tower? I've always been curious about the engineering challenges of that height and design." I found myself smiling. "Actually, that's perfect. I know every system in that building: HVAC, electrical, plumbing, structural supports. I could give you a tour that most people never get to see." Their collaboration turned out to be more successful than either had anticipated. Sarah brought theoretical knowledge and analytical skills, while Michael provided intimate understanding of how the building actually functioned day to day. Their presentation on Pinnacle Tower's innovative earthquake-resistant systems earned the highest grade in the class. "You should consider specializing in structural analysis," Professor Kim told Michael after reviewing their project. "You have an intuitive understanding of how buildings behave under stress that can't be taught from textbooks." But Michael's academic success was creating unexpected problems at home. Emma, initially thrilled about his return to school, was becoming increasingly frustrated with his limited availability.
study sessions that ran late into the night, weekend classes that cut into their traditional father-daughter time, and Michael's exhausted distraction during conversations all began to take their toll. "You're never here anymore," Emma complained one Thursday evening as Michael rushed through dinner before heading to his evening class. "And when you are here, you're either studying or too tired to talk." "This is temporary, Em. Once I graduate, things will be better for both of us." "Better for who?" Emma's voice carried an edge that reminded Michael uncomfortably of arguments he'd had with her mother during stressful periods. "You're so focused on this future that's supposed to be better, you're missing everything that's happening now." Michael felt pulled in multiple directions, torn between his daughter's immediate needs and the long-term opportunities that Victoria Sterling's sponsorship represented. At work, his reduced hours meant other staff members had to cover his responsibilities, creating resentment among colleagues who didn't understand why he was receiving special treatment. "Must be nice," muttered Tom Bradley, another night janitor who'd worked at Pinnacle Tower for over a decade. "Rich lady decides she likes you, suddenly you're too good for the regular schedule." "I'm still doing my job," Michael replied, mopping around Tom's feet as he made no effort to move from his position blocking the hallway. "Half a job," Tom corrected. "Rest of us picking up your slack while you play college boy." The tension came to a head during Michael's 6th week of classes. Emma had a school science fair that conflicted with his Saturday morning course, a presentation day he couldn't miss without seriously impacting his grade. He arranged for Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor, to attend the science fair in his place, but Emma's disappointment was palpable. "Mom would have been there," Emma said quietly that evening, words that hit Michael like a physical blow. "That's not fair, Emma. Neither is having a dad who's too busy with his own homework to care about mine." The next morning, Victoria Sterling called with what she described as exciting news. Sterling Industries is opening a new facility in downtown Chicago, a mixed-use development with residential, commercial, and office space. "We're looking for a facilities management team leader to oversee the entire project from construction through operation. I'd like to offer you the position, contingent on your graduation." That's incredible," Michael said, though he felt more overwhelmed than excited. "What would it involve?" "Salary starting at $85,000 annually, full benefits, management responsibilities for a team of 12. It's exactly the kind of position your degree program is preparing you for." $85,000. More than triple his current salary. The kind of money that could pay for Emma's college education, move them to a better neighborhood, provide security he'd never imagined possible. But it also meant even greater pressure to succeed academically, even more time away from Emma, even higher stakes if he failed. That weekend, as Michael struggled through a particularly challenging assignment on fluid dynamics, Emma sat down beside him at the kitchen table with her own homework. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure, kiddo. What's up?"
Do you still want to be doing this? The school thing, I mean. Michael looked up from his calculations, studying his daughter's face. "Why do you ask?" "Because you seem miserable. You're stressed all the time, you hardly sleep, and when you do talk to me, it's like your mind is somewhere else." Emma's voice was gentle, but direct. "I don't want you to do this for me if it's making you unhappy." "It's not about being happy or unhappy," Michael said slowly. "It's about building a better future for us." "But what if the future we have now is already okay?" Emma asked. "What if trying to make it better makes it worse?" Michael set down his pencil and really looked at his daughter, really saw her for the first time in weeks. She was growing up, becoming more thoughtful and mature with each passing month, and he was missing it. Chasing a dream that Victoria Sterling had planted in his mind, he was sacrificing the present for an uncertain future. "Are you saying you want me to quit school?" he asked. "I'm saying I want you to be sure you're doing this for the right reasons,
Because if you're doing it just to prove something to other people, or because you think you owe Victoria Sterling something, then maybe it's not worth it. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table with Victoria Sterling's business card in his hand. He thought about calling her, about explaining that he was grateful for the opportunity but wasn't sure he could handle the pressure. He thought about the look of disappointment that would cross his face, the way she'd realized she'd been wrong about his potential. But he also thought about Emma's words, about the way his daughter had learned to see through his justifications to the fears underneath. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe he was trying to prove something that didn't need proving. Maybe saving Victoria Sterling's life had been enough of a heroic act without needing to transform his entire existence as a result. The phone rang while he was still holding the business card, as if his thoughts had somehow summoned the call. "Michael, I hope I'm not calling too late." Victoria's voice sounded tired, strained in a way he'd never heard before. "I need to see you. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Is everything okay?" Michael asked, immediately concerned. "I'm not sure," Victoria admitted. "There are some things about the scholarship program that I need to discuss with you. Things I should have told you from the beginning." After she hung up, Michael stared at the phone for a long time. Whatever Victoria needed to tell him tomorrow, he had the feeling it was going to change everything again. The question was whether he was ready for another upheaval, another test of his ability to navigate between his old life and the new possibilities that Victoria Sterling represented. In her bedroom, Emma was still awake, listening to her father's side of the phone conversation through the thin walls of their apartment. She'd been watching him struggle for weeks, seeing how the weight of opportunity was slowly crushing the man who had raised her with such steady determination. Tomorrow, she decided, she would have to find the courage to tell him what she really thought about Victoria Sterling's offer. Not the polite, grateful response he expected, but the truth about what she feared he was losing in his quest to gain something more. Michael finally went to bed around 2 a.m. His textbook still spread across the kitchen table, his assignment incomplete. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of his neighborhood, sirens in the distance, music from the apartment upstairs, the hum of the refrigerator, he tried to imagine what his life would look like in 3 years. Would he be managing a team of facilities workers, living in a better apartment, watching Emma graduate from high school with college fully funded? Or would he be right back where he started, older and more tired, having chased a dream that was never really his own? The morning would bring answers, but for now, Michael closed his eyes and tried to remember what his life had felt like before Victoria Sterling entered it. Smaller perhaps, but also simpler, more predictable, more his own.
Victoria Sterling was waiting in her office when Michael arrived at Pinnacle Tower the next evening, though he'd told her he wouldn't be there until after his regular work shift ended. She was standing by the windows, silhouetted against the Chicago skyline, her posture rigid with tension that immediately put Michael on edge. "Thank you for coming," she said without turning around. "Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Michael remained standing, his instincts telling him that whatever Victoria was about to reveal would be easier to handle on his feet. "What's this about?" Victoria finally turned to face him, and Michael was struck by how different she looked. Older, somehow, with lines of stress around her eyes that hadn't been there during their coffee meeting weeks ago. "It's about the scholarship program. About why I really offered to sponsor your education." "I thought it was because you were grateful," Michael said slowly. "That was part of it, but not all of it." Victoria moved to her desk, pulling out a thick folder that she set between them. "Do you know anything about Sterling Industries' history, Michael? About how the company was founded?" Michael shook his head, though he was beginning to sense that this conversation was heading somewhere he didn't want to go. "My grandfather, William Sterling, started this company in 1962. He was a construction worker, actually. No formal education, but brilliant at understanding how buildings went together. He saved every penny he earned for 15 years, then used that money to buy a small contracting firm that was going out of business. Victoria opened the folder, revealing old photographs and documents that looked like they belonged in a museum. By the time my father inherited the company, it was worth millions. By the time I took over, it was worth hundreds of millions. 3 generations from construction worker to corporate empire. That's an impressive story, Michael said, still not understanding why Victoria was telling him about her family history. It would be if it were entirely true. Victoria's voice carried a bitterness that made Michael pay closer attention. My grandfather didn't buy that contracting firm with money he'd saved from construction work. He bought it with money he'd stolen from his employer, a pension fund that was supposed to provide security for dozens of working-class families. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that Sterling Industries was built on theft. My grandfather destroyed the financial security of people just like you to create wealth for people like me. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out more documents. Michael looked at the papers spread across Victoria's desk. Bank records, legal documents, newspaper clippings that told the story of a scandal from the 1960s, a pension fund that had mysteriously gone missing, workers who had lost their retirement savings, families that had been financially destroyed by someone they'd trusted. Your grandfather was never prosecuted? The evidence was circumstantial, and he had good lawyers. The case was settled out of court, but the families never recovered their losses. Most of those workers spent their final years in poverty because of what my grandfather did. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been trying to figure out how to make it right. The scholarship program, the job offer, it's not just about you, Michael. It's about trying to balance the scales, trying to give back to the kind of people my family took from. Michael felt a surge of anger that surprised him with its intensity. So you're what? Some kind of charity case? Your way of easing your guilt about your grandfather's crimes? No, Victoria said firmly. You're exactly what I told you before. Someone with intelligence, integrity, and potential. But I won't lie to you any longer about my motives. Helping you succeed wouldn't just change your life, it would help me live with what I've learned about my family's history.
Michael began pacing the office, his mind racing through implications and emotions he couldn't quite sort out. Do the other scholarship recipients know about this? Are they all part of your guilt relief project? There are no other scholarship recipients, Victoria admitted quietly. The program I described, it doesn't exist. I created it specifically for you. The admission hit Michael like a physical blow. Everything he'd believed about the opportunity, about his selection for a legitimate program, about earning this chance through merit, all of it was a lie. Jesus Christ, Victoria, do you have any idea what you've done? I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I know I've handled this badly. But the opportunity is still real, Michael. The education, the job offer, the chance to build a different kind of life, none of that changes. All of it changes. Michael's voice rose, and he struggled to control his temper. You made me think I'd earned this, that someone saw potential in me worth investing in. Instead, I'm just a convenient way for you to feel better about your family's dirty money. Victoria flinched at his words, but she didn't back down. That's not fair, and it's not true. Yes, my motives were complicated, but my assessment of your abilities was genuine. You're succeeding in those classes on your own merit, not because of my sponsorship. How can I believe anything you say now? Michael stopped pacing and faced her directly. How do I know this whole conversation isn't just another manipulation? Because I'm risking everything by telling you the truth. The board of directors doesn't know about my grandfather's crimes. If this information became public, it could destroy the company, cost thousands of people their jobs, wipe out the retirement funds that we've legitimately built over the past 60 years.
Michael stared at her, beginning to understand the full scope of what she was revealing. "You're trusting me with information that could ruin you." "I'm trusting you because I believe you're a good man. Because when you found me unconscious in that office, you didn't hesitate to help, even though you had no idea who I was or what I might be able to do for you in return." Victoria's voice softened slightly. "That kind of character can't be bought or manufactured, Michael. It's real, and it's rare." Michael sat down heavily in the chair across from Victoria's desk, his anger giving way to exhaustion and confusion. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to finish the program. I want you to take the job I've offered. I want you to succeed, not as my project or my charity case, but as yourself." Victoria leaned forward, her eyes intense with conviction. "And I want you to help me figure out how to make real amends for what my grandfather did." "What kind of amends?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a foundation that provides educational opportunities for working-class families. Maybe direct payments to the descendants of the workers my grandfather stole from. Maybe something neither of us has thought of yet." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What I do know is that I can't make these decisions alone. I need someone who understands what it's like to struggle financially, what it's like to worry about providing for a family, what real economic insecurity feels like." Michael was quiet for a long time, processing everything Victoria had told him. Outside the office windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, and he could see people moving through the streets below, workers heading home, families going about their evening routines, all of them unaware of the conversation taking place high above their heads. "The other students in my program," Michael said finally, "they treat me differently because they know I'm a janitor, like my experience is somehow less valuable than their formal education." "Are they right?" Victoria asked. "No. I know things about how buildings work that they'll never learn in a classroom. I understand the real-world applications of the theories they're memorizing." Michael looked at Victoria with new understanding. "Just like you understand business and finance in ways I never will, but you don't understand what it's like to choose between paying rent and buying groceries." "Exactly. Which is why I need your perspective on how to handle this situation ethically." Michael stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city where he'd spent his entire adult life, struggling to build a decent existence for himself and his daughter. "If I stay in the program, if I take the job you're offering, how do I know I'm not just perpetuating the same cycle, taking money that rightfully belongs to other people?" "Because you're not taking anything," Victoria said. "You're earning it. The education, the salary, the opportunities, you're working for all of it. The only difference is that I'm providing the initial investment. An investment motivated by guilt. An investment motivated by a desire to make things right," Victoria corrected. "The guilt is mine to deal with, Michael. It doesn't diminish what you're accomplishing." Michael turned back to face her. "What if I decide I can't be part of this? What if I want to quit the program and go back to my regular schedule?" "Then that's your choice, and I'll respect it. Your current job is secure, regardless of what you decide about your education. But before you make that decision, I want you to consider something." "What?" "Your daughter. What message does it send to Emma if you walk away from this opportunity because the motives behind it weren't pure? What does it teach her about taking chances, about believing in herself, about accepting help when it's offered?" Victoria's words hit closer to home than Michael wanted to admit. Emma had been so proud of his academic success, so excited about the possibilities his education might create for their future. How could he explain to her that he was quitting the program because he felt uncomfortable with the complex ethics of how the opportunity had been offered? "I need time to think about this," Michael said. "Of course, take all the time you need. Victoria closed the folder of documents and locked it in her desk drawer. "But, Michael, whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you, seeing the kind of person you are, has changed my perspective on a lot of things. You've already given me more than I've given you." As Michael left Victoria's office that night, his mind churned with questions that had no easy answers. Was it possible to accept help from someone whose family had built their wealth through exploitation? Could good intentions in the present make up for harmful actions in the past? And most importantly, what did he owe to Emma's future versus his own sense of moral clarity? The next morning, Michael called in sick to work, something he'd done perhaps 3 times in his entire adult life. Instead of going to his classes or his job, he spent the day walking through Chicago, visiting places that had shaped his understanding of right and wrong. The construction site where he'd worked briefly after Sarah's diagnosis, where he'd learned that companies would sacrifice worker safety to save money. The community college where he'd taken night classes years ago, before life became too complicated for education. The cemetery where Sarah was buried, where he'd promised her he would do whatever it took to give Emma a good life. By evening, Michael knew what he had to do. He called Victoria Sterling's direct line and asked for another meeting. "I'll finish the program," he told her when they met again in her office, "and I'll take the job you offered. But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, no more lies. If there are other complications or hidden motivations, I want to know them now. Second, whatever foundation or compensation fund you create for the families your grandfather hurt, I want to be involved in planning it, not just be a token representative. And third, I want my daughter to know the truth about how this opportunity came about." Victoria nodded slowly. "Those are fair conditions. Are you sure about telling Emma? She might not understand the complexities of the situation." "She's smarter than most adults I know," Michael said. "She deserves to understand why her father made the choices he made, and she deserves to decide for herself what she thinks about accepting help that comes with moral complications." "Agreed. Anything else?" Michael smiled for the first time since Victoria had revealed her family's history. "Yeah. I want to meet the other students in my program socially, outside of class. I want them to see me as more than just the janitor who somehow got lucky. If I'm going to succeed in this new career, I need to be able to work with people who might initially judge me based on my background." "That sounds like an excellent idea. I'll arrange something." As they shook hands on their new understanding, Michael felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at finally knowing the truth, apprehension about the ethical challenges ahead, and something that might have been excitement about the opportunity still available to him. For the first time since Victoria Sterling had entered his life, he felt like he was making decisions based on complete information rather than partial truths. The real test would come when he explained everything to Emma, when he watched her face as she processed the complicated reality of their changing circumstances. But Michael was confident that his daughter, like her mother before her, would find a way to see clearly through moral complexity to the choices that mattered most. Single dad janitor saves millionaire from a gas leak. Her identity transforms his future. Emma's reaction to the truth was not what Michael had expected. He'd prepared himself for anger, disappointment, maybe confusion about the ethical implications of accepting help from someone whose wealth was built on exploitation. Instead, his 14-year-old daughter listened quietly to the entire story, asked several thoughtful questions, and then surprised him with her insight. "So basically," Emma said, curled up in her favorite chair with a cup of hot chocolate, "Victoria Sterling found out her family did something terrible, and instead of just feeling bad about it, she's trying to actually fix it." "That's one way to look at it," Michael replied carefully. "And you're helping her figure out how to fix it while also getting an education that could change our whole lives." "Yes, but—" "Dad," Emma interrupted, fixing him with a steady gaze that reminded him achingly of her mother. "Do you think Mom would have wanted you to turn down this opportunity because the person offering it had complicated reasons?" Michael considered the question seriously. Sarah had been pragmatic about money and opportunities, having grown up in a family that struggled financially. But she also had a strong moral compass that helped her navigate difficult decisions. I think Mom would have wanted me to find a way to accept help while staying true to our values. Then that's what you should do, Emma said simply. Besides, it sounds like Victoria Sterling needs your help as much as she needs hers. Maybe that's how good things happen, when people who need different things can help each other get them. Michael marveled at his daughter's ability to cut through complex ethical considerations to reach practical wisdom. Over the following weeks, as he threw himself back into his studies with renewed purpose, he found himself thinking often about Emma's perspective on mutual need and mutual benefit. The social gathering Victoria arranged with his classmates turned out to be more successful than Michael had dared to hope. She organized it as a networking event at a downtown restaurant, inviting not just the students from Michael's program, but also young professionals from various engineering and construction firms. In that mixed environment, Michael's practical experience became an asset rather than a liability.
"You actually know how HVAC systems behave in extreme weather?" asked Jennifer Walsh, a structural engineer who'd been somewhat dismissive of Michael in class. "I've been trying to solve a ventilation problem in one of our office buildings for months." "Temperature differentials create pressure changes that most people don't account for," Michael explained. "The theoretical calculations work fine until you factor in how occupants actually use the space, how cleaning schedules affect airflow, how small maintenance issues compound over time." By the end of the evening, Michael had exchanged contact information with several classmates and had been invited to consult on 2 different projects. Brad, the student who'd been condescending about Michael's custodial background, approached him as the evening was winding down. "I owe you an apology," Brad said, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. "I made assumptions about you based on your job, and that was wrong. You know more about how buildings actually work than anyone else in our program." "We all bring different strengths," Michael replied diplomatically. "That's what makes good teams." "Still, I'm sorry, and I'd like to buy you coffee sometime. Pick your brain about some projects I'm working on." Michael accepted the invitation, recognizing that Brad's attitude shift represented something larger, a grudging acknowledgement that practical experience had value equal to formal education. It was a recognition Michael had been seeking without realizing it, validation that his knowledge and skills mattered regardless of how he'd acquired them. Meanwhile, Victoria was making good on her promise to involve Michael in planning the foundation that would address her grandfather's historical crimes. They met weekly to discuss structures, policies, and beneficiaries, conversations that challenged both of them to think beyond their usual perspectives. "I keep coming back to education," Victoria said during one of their planning sessions. "It's the most reliable path out of economic insecurity." Education is important, but it's not the only barrier people face. Childcare, transportation, healthcare costs, there are a dozen reasons why someone might not be able to take advantage of educational opportunities, even if they're available. So we need to address the whole ecosystem of support, not just tuition costs. Exactly. And we need to make sure we're reaching people who might not know these opportunities exist. Marketing scholarships in universities doesn't help someone who never considered college a possibility. Their conversations led to the creation of the William Sterling Memorial Foundation, a name that Victoria insisted on despite Michael's suggestion that they not memorialize someone who'd committed fraud. He needs to be remembered for what he did, good and bad. That's the only way to ensure it doesn't happen again. The foundation would provide comprehensive support for working-class adults pursuing education, not just tuition, but also childcare, transportation assistance, tutoring, and career placement services. They would partner with community organizations, labor unions, and community colleges to reach people where they were, rather than expecting them to navigate unfamiliar institutional structures. We should start small. Maybe 10 recipients the first year. Really focus on doing it right rather than trying to help as many people as possible immediately. Agreed. and I want you to help interview candidates. You'll be able to spot the people who are serious about this opportunity versus those who might not be ready for the commitment. As the foundation took shape, Michael found himself becoming increasingly excited about its potential impact. This was work that felt meaningful in a way his custodial job never had. Not because there was anything wrong with cleaning buildings, but because this work directly addressed problems he'd experienced himself. His academic performance had improved dramatically since learning the truth about Victoria's motives. Paradoxically, knowing that his opportunity was ethically complicated had freed him to focus on earning it through his own efforts. His professors began referencing his contributions in their lectures, using his practical insights to illustrate theoretical concepts for other students. Mr. Simmons raises an important point about real-world applications. Theoretical models are only as good as our understanding of actual usage patterns.
Michael felt a quiet pride in these moments of recognition, but more importantly, he felt increasingly confident about his ability to succeed in his new career path. The knowledge he was gaining in classes combined with his existing expertise was creating a skill set that several engineering firms had already expressed interest in recruiting. Michael Simmons was living paycheck to paycheck as a janitor, working night shifts to support his 17-year-old daughter Emma after his wife Sarah's death. His world was defined by financial constraints, missed opportunities, and the constant worry of providing for Emma's future. Every decision revolved around money, or the lack of it. College seemed like an impossible dream for Emma, despite her intelligence and potential. Then came the night that changed everything. While cleaning the offices of Sterling Industries, Michael detected a dangerous gas leak. Without hesitation, he evacuated the building and called emergency services, likely preventing a catastrophic explosion. Among those he saved was Victoria Sterling, the company's CEO, and heir to an industrial fortune built on her family's complex history. Victoria Sterling carried a heavy burden. Her family's wealth had been built partly through her grandfather William's exploitation of working-class employees during the early 20th century. Dangerous working conditions, union busting, and prioritizing profits over human lives. This legacy haunted Victoria, creating a deep sense of responsibility to somehow balance the moral scales. When she learned that Michael, her savior, was struggling financially despite his heroic act, Victoria saw an opportunity to address both her family's historical wrongs and Michael's immediate needs. But her approach was carefully considered, not impulsive charity. Victoria offered Michael something unprecedented: full financial support to pursue an engineering degree while maintaining his current salary. This wasn't charity. It was an investment in potential that had been overlooked by circumstance. Michael could attend classes during the day while his income remained stable, finally allowing him to break free from the cycle of financial survival. The offer terrified Michael. He'd spent years believing that his intelligence and capabilities were limited by his circumstances. Could he really succeed in an academic environment? Could he compete with traditionally educated students? The fear of failure almost made him refuse the opportunity that would change his family's trajectory forever. Michael's return to education wasn't easy. He struggled with imposter syndrome, feeling out of place among younger, more privileged students. His practical knowledge from years of building maintenance often clashed with theoretical approaches taught in classrooms. However, this unique perspective became his greatest asset. Professors and classmates began to value Michael's real-world insights. He could explain why certain engineering solutions failed in practice, how buildings actually functioned under stress, and what factors academic theories often overlooked. His contributions enriched classroom discussions and helped bridge the gap between theory and application. Emma watched her father's transformation with pride and amazement. For the first time in her life, she could pursue her own academic dreams without the constant weight of financial limitations. When her school counselor recommended expensive summer programs for high-achieving students, Michael could confidently say, "We'll figure out a way to make it work." Victoria's support extended beyond Michael's individual success. Together, they established the William Sterling Memorial Foundation, named after Victoria's grandfather, as both acknowledgement and atonement for his legacy. This foundation would provide comprehensive educational support for working-class adults seeking to change their career trajectories. The foundation's approach was carefully designed to maintain dignity while providing opportunity. Recipients were selected based on merit and potential, not as charity cases or symbols. The program offered not just tuition assistance, but also living wage support, recognizing that adults often couldn't abandon their financial responsibilities to pursue education. Michael became intimately involved in the foundation's development, helping design programs that understood the real barriers working-class adults faced.
3 years after graduation, Michael had become Director of Facilities Management at Sterling Industries' newest development, a sustainable mixed-use complex that became a model for environmentally responsible urban design. His unique background allowed him to create systems that worked for real people in real situations, not just theoretical ideals. Emma flourished in this new environment. She was accepted to prestigious engineering programs with full scholarships, her summer research leading to published papers and recognition that opened doors her father had never imagined possible. But more importantly, she developed confidence and ambition without the defensive wariness that had characterized her father's earlier life. The building Michael helped design incorporated innovative features like rainwater collection systems, reducing water usage by 30%, rooftop gardens, and energy management systems that balanced efficiency with practical functionality. His work drew international attention as an example of how environmental responsibility could integrate with commercial success. The foundation's success in Chicago led to national expansion. 40 to 50 individuals had been directly helped through Michael's involvement, but the impact multiplied as these recipients went on to help others. The foundation developed partnerships with community colleges, creating smoother pathways for career transitions and eliminating barriers that Michael had overcome through determination alone. Victoria evolved alongside the foundation's growth. Her family's historical guilt transformed into productive motivation, driving increasingly ambitious projects that addressed systemic inequalities rather than individual hardships. The foundation became her primary focus, creating lasting change that would outlive both her and Michael. The story doesn't shy away from the moral complexity of accepting help. Michael grappled with questions about self-reliance, earned success, and the ethics of privilege-based assistance. Emma, with the perceptiveness of her generation, asked her father if he missed the simplicity of his former life and the feeling of having earned everything independently. Michael's response revealed profound wisdom gained through experience. Nobody succeeds entirely on their own. Even before Victoria's offer, I was benefiting from teachers who cared enough to educate me, from a society that provided public schools and libraries. The myth of complete self-reliance is just that, a myth. This understanding became central to his philosophy as a board member of the foundation. Success required both individual effort and social support. Acknowledging this reality didn't diminish personal achievement, but rather recognized the interconnected nature of human progress. The story's conclusion redefines heroism. Michael learned that heroes weren't people who single-handedly overcame impossible odds. True heroes accepted help when offered, worked hard to justify others' faith in them, and used their success to extend similar opportunities to others. As Michael watched Emma prepare her college applications, describing how to write about transformative change, he understood that his story wasn't really about saving Victoria Sterling's life. It was about building a legacy that would outlive them all, a foundation that would continue opening doors for generations of working-class adults seeking to transform their circumstances through education and opportunity. The Chicago skyline outside their window represented thousands of similar stories waiting to unfold. Each building was maintained by people like Michael had been.
housing dreams and struggles and quiet acts of heroism that rarely made headlines. His transformation proved that extraordinary change could emerge from ordinary courage, that one split-second decision to help a stranger could create ripple effects lasting for generations. Michael's journey from janitor to director demonstrates that potential exists everywhere, waiting for the right combination of opportunity, support, and individual determination. His story challenges assumptions about class, merit, and the nature of success, while celebrating both personal achievement and collective responsibility. The foundation continues expanding, the scholarship recipients keep succeeding, and Emma prepares for her own journey into a world of possibilities that her father's courage made accessible. Michael's legacy isn't measured in his salary or title, but in the doors he helped open for others, and the proof he provided that one act of courage truly can transform everything. If this incredible journey from janitor to director inspired you and showed you how one moment of courage can change everything, please like this story, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe for more amazing tales that prove ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. Your support helps us bring you these life-changing stories that remind us all of the potential within ourselves and others. Subscribe now to join our community of people who believe in the power of human resilience and the importance of helping others reach their dreams.